The first time Kian kissed him, it was raining, and neither of them meant for it to happen. That's the sentence that should open this story, because it's the sentence that changes everything else. Two best friends. One porch, one storm, and a kiss that lasted 4 seconds and ruined both their lives in the best possible way. But to understand why it mattered, you have to go back 3 months, to before the rain, before the almost kisses, before the silence that nearly broke them. Back to the summer, everything started to shift, so quietly that neither of them noticed until it was too late to pretend they hadn't. Elias had known Kian since they were 14 years old, since a chemistry class where Kian set his sleeve on fire trying to look cool lighting a Bunsen burner, and Elias, quiet, watchful, always 2 steps ahead of everyone else in the room, had put it out with his bare hand before the smoke alarm even registered the smell. "You just saved my life," Kian had said, staring at his singed sleeve like it belonged to someone else. "I saved your dignity," Elias corrected. "Your life was never really in danger." Kian had laughed. A big, unguarded laugh that turned heads across the room, and something about the sound of it lodged itself permanently in Elias's memory. The way certain songs do. The way certain smells bring you back to a specific afternoon years later. They'd been inseparable ever since. 6 years of inside jokes, of showing up at each other's houses unannounced, of long drives with the windows down and no destination in mind. 6 years where Elias told himself over and over that what he felt for his best friend was just closeness. Just the ordinary intensity of loving someone who knew you better than you knew yourself. He was 20 now. Kian was 21. And Elias had never once said the truth out loud, not to Kian, not to anyone. That somewhere in those 6 years closeness had become something else, something he didn't have a name for that felt safe to say. It was late June when Kian showed up at Elias's apartment with 2 bags of groceries and an announcement. "I'm cooking for you," he said, kicking the door shut behind him with his heel. "Don't argue." "I wasn't going to argue," Elias said, already reaching for one of the bags. "I was going to ask if you know how to cook. I know how to follow a recipe on my phone while pretending I don't need it." "That's not the same thing." "It's close enough," Kian said, grinning, and set the bags on the counter like he owned the place, which, in the way that mattered, he sort of did. His toothbrush lived in Elias's bathroom. His hoodie lived on the back of Elias's desk chair. His presence lived in every corner of the apartment so completely that, when he wasn't there, the space felt unfinished. Elias leaned against the counter and watched him unpack tomatoes, garlic, a block of Parmesan, a bottle of wine neither of them was quite old enough to buy without Kian's fake ID doing some heavy lifting. The evening light came through the kitchen window at a low gold angle, catching the side of Kian's face, and Elias had the sudden, dangerous thought that he could watch this exact moment on a loop forever and never get bored of it. "You're staring," Kian said without looking up. "I'm supervising." "You're staring, Eli." "Fine. I'm staring." "You're bad at chopping garlic and it's mildly hypnotic." Kian looked up then, and for a second, just a second, something passed between them that neither of them acknowledged. A held glance that went on half a beat too long. Elias felt his pulse do something unfamiliar, a stutter step, and looked away first, reaching for plates he didn't need yet just to have something to do with his hands. "You're being weird," Kian said, but there was no edge to it. If anything, his voice had gone softer. "I'm always weird. You just usually pretend not to notice." "I notice everything about you," Kian said, and then, as if he'd surprised himself with the sentence, turned back to the cutting board a little too quickly. Neither of them mentioned it again that night. But Elias lay awake afterward, replaying it, turning the words over like a stone he couldn't stop touching. "I notice everything about you." Could have meant nothing. Best friends said things like that. Best friends complimented each other, teased each other, existed in each other's space without a second thought. Except Elias had never said something like that to anyone else in his life, and he doubted Kian had either. The tension, if that's even the right word for something so quiet, so easy to dismiss, kept showing up after that. Not in big moments, in small ones, the kind you could talk yourself out of if you tried hard enough, and Elias tried very hard. There was the afternoon at the lake, 3 weeks later, when Kian waded out of the water and shook his hair like a dog, spraying Elias, who was sitting on a towel pretending to read a book he hadn't turned a page of in 20 minutes. "You're an animal," Elias said, wiping his face. "You love it." I tolerate it. Kian dropped down beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched, water still dripping off him onto the sand. He didn't move away. Neither did Elias. They sat like that for a long moment, the lake glittering in front of them, Kian's breathing slowing from the swim, and Elias became aware, acutely, uncomfortably aware, of every point where their bodies met. Can I tell you something? Kian said, not quite a question. You're going to whether I say yes or not. True. Kian picked at a thread on the edge of the towel. Sometimes I think we're too comfortable with each other. Like, we do stuff other friends wouldn't do. Is that weird? Elias kept his eyes on the water. What stuff? I don't know. This. Sitting like this. I don't sit like this with anyone else. Maybe you just like personal space violations. Eli. Kian's voice had dropped, gone serious in a way that made Elias's chest tighten. I'm trying to say something and you're doing the thing where you make a joke so we don't have to talk about it. Elias finally looked at him. Kian's eyes, a warm brown that had always struck Elias as unfairly kind, like they'd been built specifically to make people feel safe, were fixed on him with an intensity that made it hard to breathe normally. Okay, Elias said quietly. I'm listening. But Kian seemed to lose his nerve or maybe just his words because after a moment he looked back out at the lake and said, never mind. Forget it. Kian. Race you to the dock, he said instead, already standing, already running, and Elias watched him go, heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with the sudden sprint, and thought, something is happening here and I don't know if either of us is brave enough to name it. The thing about slow burns is that they don't announce themselves. They accumulate. A hand that lingers half a second too long on a shoulder. A laugh that comes too easily, too warmly, at a joke that wasn't even that funny. A habit of texting goodnight even on nights they'd already said goodbye in person. As if the day couldn't end without one more small proof that the other person existed and mattered. By July, Elias had stopped being able to lie to himself about what he wanted, even if he still couldn't say it out loud. He noticed the way Kian's voice changed when he talked about people he was interested in, flat, performative, like he was reciting lines from a script he didn't believe in. He noticed that Kian hadn't actually dated anyone in almost a year, despite plenty of offers, despite being the kind of easy, warm, funny person people wanted to be around. He noticed, too, the way Kian looked at him sometimes when he thought Elias wasn't paying attention. A kind of quiet, searching look, like he was trying to solve something. It was Priya, Elias's coworker, and the only person who knew the shape of what he was feeling even if she didn't have all the details, who finally said the thing out loud. You're in love with him, she said one afternoon at the coffee shop near their office, stirring her drink like it was the most obvious statement in the world. Elias nearly choked. What? No, he's my best friend. Elias, you talk about him more than you talk about anything else. You smile differently when you say his name. I've watched you check your phone 4 times in the last 10 minutes because you're hoping he texted. That's normal. Best friends do that. Priya gave him a look so patient and so unimpressed that it somehow felt worse than if she'd argued with him. Okay, she said. Sure, best friends. He's not even. Elias stopped himself. Not even what? Gay? How do you know? I've never asked. It's not something you just ask. Have you ever thought, Priya said gently, setting her cup down, that maybe the reason neither of you has said anything is because you're both scared of exactly the same thing? Losing each other? Elias didn't have an answer for that. He turned it over in his mind for days afterward, at work, in the shower, lying in bed at night with his phone screen lighting up his face because he was, once again, rereading a text conversation with Kian that meant nothing and everything at the same time. Good night, Eli. Night, Key. Such small words. Such an enormous weight underneath them. The turning point, the moment the story really begins, if you want to trace it back to a single hinge, happened at a party neither of them particularly wanted to be at. It was a mutual friend's birthday, loud music, too many people crammed into a too small apartment. The kind of night where everyone was slightly performing a version of themselves. Elias hated parties like this. He'd only gone because Kian asked him to, and there was very little Elias wouldn't do if Kian asked. They'd ended up on the fire escape around midnight, away from the noise, sharing a lukewarm can of soda because neither of them particularly wanted to drink. The city spread out below them in a smear of lights. Can I ask you something? Elias said, watching a couple argue softly on the sidewalk below. Always. Why didn't you bring anyone tonight? You could have. Kian was quiet for a second. I didn't want to. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. Kian took the soda can back. Took a sip he didn't need, just to buy himself a second. Can I ask you something back? Go ahead. Have you ever liked someone you weren't supposed to like? Elias's heart did that stutter step again, harder this time. Define supposed to. Someone where the timing is wrong or the situation is wrong, or you're scared that if you say it out loud, it'll break something you can't fix. Kian wasn't looking at him now. He was looking at the city, his jaw tight, his hands wrapped around the can like it was the only steady thing in reach. Yeah, Elias said quietly, before he could stop himself. Yeah, I have. Kian's head turned. Their eyes met, and this time neither of them looked away. The party noise behind them seemed to fade into something distant, unimportant. Elias could hear his own heartbeat. He was sure, absolutely sure, that Kian could too if he leaned close enough. Is it someone I know? Kian asked, his voice barely above the wind. Every instinct in Elias's body screamed at him to say something safe, to deflect, to make a joke the way he always did, the way that had protected both of them for 6 years from ever having to have this conversation. Instead, for the first time, he let the silence sit. He let Kian see the truth on his face, whatever that truth looked like from the outside. Eli, Kian said, softer now, almost a whisper, leaning in, and then the fire escape door banged open, and a group of laughing strangers spilled out looking for fresh air, and the moment shattered like glass. Kian pulled back so fast it was like he'd been burned. We should head back in, he said, not meeting Elias's eyes, and disappeared through the door before Elias could say anything at all. They didn't talk about it. Not that night, not the next day. It sat between them unspoken for 2 weeks. 2 weeks of texts that felt more careful than usual, of Kian being busy on nights he was never usually busy, of a distance neither of them had the courage to name. Distance, when it happens between two people who have never had any, is its own kind of grief. Elias felt it in the small things first. Kian used to text him good morning without fail. A habit so old Elias couldn't remember when it started. The text stopped, not abruptly, but the way a tide goes out, gradually, and then all at once you're standing on dry sand wondering where the water went. He told himself it didn't mean anything. Kian was busy with his new job. Kian was tired. Kian was allowed to have a life that didn't orbit entirely around Elias, no matter how much it had always felt that way. But he knew, in the place in his chest that ached every time his phone stayed silent, that something had shifted on that fire escape, and neither of them had the language to fix it. It was Marcus, Kian's older brother, who Elias had known almost as long as he'd known Kian, who finally said something, cornering Elias at a family barbecue he'd been invited to more out of habit than anything else. You two fighting? Marcus asked, handing him a plate. No. Why? Because Kian's been weird for 2 weeks and every time your name comes up he changes the subject. Marcus studied him for a second, the way older brothers do when they already suspect the answer to a question. You know something's going on with him, right? He hasn't been sleeping. He's been quiet. That's not him. Elias's stomach twisted. I don't know what you mean. I think you do, Marcus said, not unkindly. I've known my brother his whole life, Eli. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you, and I've never seen him this scared, either. Elias didn't sleep that night. He lay in the dark replaying 6 years, every glance, every lingering touch, every unfinished sentence, and understood, with a clarity that felt almost physical, that he could not spend another day pretending this was just friendship. Whatever the cost, whatever it broke. The next morning, he texted Kian for the first time in 4 days. Can we talk? In person. Today, if you're free. The reply took 11 minutes. 11 minutes Elias spent staring at his phone, stomach in knots, convinced with each passing second that Kian was drafting some gentle way to end their friendship entirely. Yeah. Come over. I need to say some things too. It was raining by the time Elias got to Kian's building. A warm summer rain that soaked through his jacket in the 2 minutes it took to walk from his car to the door. Kian was waiting on the porch when he arrived, arms crossed, hair damp from having stepped out to check for him, and the sight of him, nervous, uncertain, achingly familiar, made something in Elias's chest crack open. "Hey," Kian said. "Hey." Neither of them moved for a second. The rain fell steadily around the porch's small overhang, a curtain of white noise that made the world outside feel like it had temporarily paused. "I've been a bad friend the last couple weeks," Kian said finally, not quite looking at him. "I know I have. I didn't know what to do with what happened at the party. I didn't know how to be around you without saying something I couldn't take back." "Then say it," Elias said. His voice came out rougher than he intended, thick with everything he'd been holding in for 6 years. "Say it, Kian. Please. I can't keep doing this thing where we both know something's there and neither of us says it." Kian finally looked up, and his eyes were wet, and it wasn't just the rain. "I'm scared," he admitted. "I'm scared that if I say it and I'm wrong about what I think I saw on that fire escape, I lose you completely. You're the most important person in my life, Eli. You have been for 6 years. I would rather have you as my best friend forever than risk losing you for something that might not even be real." "It's real," Elias said, stepping closer, his heart hammering so hard it hurt. "Kian, it's real. I've been in love with you for I don't even know how long. Maybe years. Maybe since before I even had a word for it. I used to think if I never said it, I'd never have to find out if I was going to lose you over it. But I'm losing you anyway. Just slower, just quieter. And I would rather tell you the truth and have it break something than keep lying to both of us." The rain kept falling. Kian stared at him like he'd been struck, like the words had physically landed somewhere in his chest. And for one terrible second Elias thought he'd made the worst mistake of his life. Then Kian closed the distance between them in 2 steps and kissed him. It wasn't practiced or perfect. It was clumsy with relief, both of them breathing too hard, Kian's hands coming up to frame Elias's face like he needed to hold on to something solid. Elias's fingers curling into the front of his shirt like letting go wasn't an option anymore. It lasted for seconds, maybe 5, the rain soaking both of them through, and when they finally broke apart, foreheads pressed together, both of them were laughing, the kind of laugh that comes out when relief and joy and disbelief all arrive at once. "I've wanted to do that since the lake," Kian said against his mouth. "Maybe longer. I just didn't know how to say it." "You could have just said it," Elias murmured, still not quite believing this was real. "Instead of 6 years of near misses. Where's the fun in that?" Kian pulled back just enough to look at him properly, rain dripping off both their faces, and the look on his face was one Elias had never seen before. Open, unguarded, terrified and happy in equal measure. "I love you, Eli. I don't know when it started. I just know I don't want to spend one more day not saying it." "I love you too," Elias said, and it felt like the truest sentence he'd ever spoken. "I have for a long time." It wasn't easy after that. First confessions rarely are. There were hard conversations still to come. About what this meant, about who they'd tell and when, about the fear that still lived in both of them from years of hiding something so central to who they were. There were nights of doubt, moments where old habits of deflection crept back in, arguments born less from anger than from two people learning, clumsily, how to be honest with each other in a completely new way. But there was also this mornings that started with "good morning, I love you" instead of just "good morning." A relationship built on 6 years of foundation so solid that nothing about falling in love felt unfamiliar. It felt, instead, like coming home to a place they'd always belonged. Kian introduced Elias to his family not as his best friend but as his boyfriend, hand steady in his the whole time, chin up despite the nerves. Elias, in turn, found a version of bravery he hadn't known he had, one conversation, one honest sentence at a time. 6 months later, on the anniversary of that rainy night, they sat on the same porch, dry this time, a warm evening instead of a storm, and Kian handed him a mug of tea and said, "Remember when we almost missed this?" "I try not to think about it," Elias said. "Makes me want to go back and shake both of us." We got there eventually, Elias agreed, and leaned his head on Kian's shoulder, and thought that maybe some love stories don't need to be fast to be real. Maybe the slow ones, the ones built brick by brick out of years of quiet devotion, are the ones that last. If you were holding your breath through that fire escape scene, through the rain, through every almost kiss along the way, I felt it too, writing it, If the story moved you, hit subscribe so you don't miss what's next, drop a like, and tell me in the comments which moment hit you hardest. Because there's more to this story than what you just read. What happens when Elias and Kian have to tell their families the truth? Together? What happens when an old feeling from Kian's past resurfaces right when things finally feel steady? You asked. So here it is, the part where the story almost fell apart before it truly began. If part 1 was about learning to tell the truth, part 2 is about learning to keep telling it. Even when the truth gets complicated. Even when the past shows up uninvited on your doorstep wearing a familiar face. 3 weeks after the rain, Elias and Kian sat in Elias's car outside his parents' house. Engine off. Both of them staring at the front door like it might open on its own and save them the trouble. "We don't have to do this today," Kian said, though his hand found Elias's on the center console anyway, fingers lacing together like he needed the anchor more than the escape route he was offering. "We do, actually," Elias said, "because if we don't do it today, I'll find a reason to push it to next week, and then next month, and then we'll be 40 and still best friends as far as my mother's concerned. 40 isn't so bad. I hear 40-year-olds get good health insurance." Kian. "Sorry. Nervous joking. It's a defense mechanism, you've told me this." Elias squeezed his hand. "Whatever happens in there, I already know how I feel. Nothing they say changes that." It turned out he needn't have worried the way he had. His mother, a practical woman who had watched Kian eat dinner at her table roughly 900 times over 6 years, took one look at their laced fingers and said, "Well, finally," with the exasperated relief of someone whose favorite show had taken 3 seasons too long to get 2 characters together. His father took a beat longer, a quiet processing pause that made Elias's chest tighten, and then simply asked Kian to pass the salt, the most ordinary sentence in the world, which Elias understood, with a rush of gratitude, was its own kind of acceptance. Kian's family was harder. Not cruel, never cruel, but slower, quieter, weighted with the kind of old-fashioned expectations that don't disappear just because someone finally has the courage to challenge them. His mother cried, though she insisted it wasn't about disapproval, just adjustment, just letting go of a picture of his future she'd carried without meaning to. His father said very little at all, which frightened Kian more than any argument would have. "He needs time," Marcus told them both quietly, in the driveway, after that first difficult dinner. "That doesn't mean he loves you less. It means he's a stubborn old man learning something new at 58. Give him a minute. He'll get there." Kian was quiet in the car afterward, staring out the window at the streetlights blurring past. "You okay?" Elias asked, one hand on the wheel, the other reaching over to rest on Kian's knee. "I will be," Kian said. "It's just, I always thought the hard part was telling myself the truth. Turns out that was just round 1. I'm not going anywhere," Elias said, "whatever round it is." Kian turned his head, managed a small, tired smile. "I know. That's the only reason I'm not falling apart right now." His name was Dorian, and he arrived on a Tuesday which felt, in hindsight, like an insultingly ordinary day for someone to walk back into a life and threaten to unravel it. Elias was at Kian's apartment, half asleep on the couch with his head in Kian's lap. A movie neither of them was really watching playing on low volume, when Kian's phone lit up on the coffee table. Elias wasn't trying to look, but the name on the screen, Dorian, made Kian go very still beneath him, his hand pausing mid-motion in Elias's hair. "Who's Dorian?" Elias asked, sitting up. Kian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Someone from college. It doesn't matter." "Clearly matters. You went stiff as a board." Kian exhaled, set the phone face down like that might make the problem disappear. "He was the first guy I ever had feelings for. Before you. Before I understood what any of it meant. It ended badly. He wasn't ready to be honest about who he was, and I got hurt pretty badly waiting around for him to be. I haven't talked to him in almost 2 years. And now he's texting you." "Now he's texting me," Kian confirmed, not touching the phone. "Says he's back in town. Wants to catch up." Elias felt something cold and unfamiliar settle in his stomach. Jealousy, he realized, an emotion he'd never had cause to feel about Kian before, because for 6 years there had been no one to be jealous of. Now there was a name, a history, a version of Kian that existed before either of them had found the courage to be honest with each other. "Do you want to see him?" Elias asked, keeping his voice carefully even. "I don't know," Kian admitted, which stung more than a simple no would have. "He was important to me once. I think some part of me always wondered what would have happened if he'd been braver back then." The silence that followed sat heavy between them, the movie forgotten entirely. "I'm not going to tell you not to see an old friend," Elias said finally, though every word cost him something. "But I need you to be honest with me about how you're feeling. That's the one thing I can't survive us losing again." Kian reached for his hand. "I love you, Eli. Nothing about seeing Dorian changes that. I think I need to close that door properly instead of just letting it hang open behind me. Does that make sense?" "It does," Elias said, and meant it, even as the fear sat coiled tight in his chest. "Just don't shut me out while you do it." Kian met Dorian for coffee the following week. Elias didn't ask for details, told himself he wouldn't ask, and then spent the entire hour pacing his apartment, checking his phone every few minutes, hating himself a little for the insecurity clawing up his throat. Kian showed up at his door 40 minutes after the coffee was supposed to end, looking not triumphant, not devastated, but strangely lighter, like he'd set down a weight he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten its shape. "How was it?" Elias asked, trying to sound casual and failing. "Weird," Kian admitted, stepping inside, shrugging off his jacket. He apologized for back then, said he wasn't ready, and by the time he was, I'd already moved on, and he understood why. "And how did that feel?" "Like closing a book I never finished reading," Kian said. "He's not Eli, he's not you. He was never going to be what you are to me. I think some small stubborn part of me needed to see that in person to actually believe it." Elias felt the coiled tightness in his chest finally loosen. "And now?" "Now," Kian said, closing the distance between them, sliding his arms around Elias's waist, resting his forehead against his. "I'd like to stop talking about my ex and spend the rest of the night reminding you that you're the only person I've ever actually chosen. Repeatedly. On purpose. Sober." "That's a low bar," Elias said, but he was already smiling, already leaning in. "It's the only bar that matters," Kian murmured, and kissed him. Slow, certain. Nothing at all like the desperate, rain-soaked first kiss on the porch. This one had no fear in it. Just certainty. Just two people who had chosen each other and kept choosing, and intended to keep choosing for a long time yet. The porch looked different in late spring. String lights instead of rain. The small garden Kian had insisted on planting finally blooming along the railing. A warmth in the air that had nothing to do with weather. Kian's father was there this time, sitting stiffly in a folding chair with a plate of food he wasn't really eating, watching his son laugh at something Elias said with an expression that had softened, slowly, over the better part of a year, into something that finally looked like peace. He hadn't said much about it, even now, but he'd shown up. He kept showing up. And Kian had told Elias quietly one night that sometimes showing up was its own kind of "I love you," spoken in the only language his father had. "Penny for your thoughts," Kian said, dropping into the seat beside him, 2 drinks in hand. "Just thinking about the rain," Elias said, accepting one. "About how close we came to never saying anything at all. We would have figured it out eventually," Kian said. "I refuse to believe we were ever going to just quietly stay best friends forever and never mention any of this. I don't know. We're both stubborn. We're both idiots," Kian corrected, grinning, "who got very lucky that one of us finally broke first." "That was me, for the record." "It was absolutely you," Kian agreed, leaning his head against Elias's shoulder as the evening settled gold and warm around them. "Best decision either of us ever made." Elias pressed a kiss to the top of his head, watched the string lights flicker on as the sky dimmed, and thought that this ordinary, hard-won, deeply chosen life was worth every year it had taken them to get here. That's the story, from the fire escape to forever. If Elias and Kian's journey stayed with you, make sure you're subscribed for more slow burn stories like this one. Drop a like if you were rooting for them the whole way through, and tell me in the comments. Was Dorian's return the tension you were expecting, or did it catch you off guard?